16 games, 14 wins, 40 goals scored and just 14 conceded. Arsenal have been unreal this season, but on Tuesday they faced up against a very impressive Newcastle side, who themselves have lost just once all season and had the best defence of any side in England. It was destined to be a feisty affair, with two of England's biggest historical teams battling it out at the top of the table, with each side having their best season in around 20 years. This is a tactical breakdown on how Newcastle United became the first team to stop Arsenal from scoring this season. Firstly, let me do a breakdown on the backstory of both of these teams before I get onto the tactical analysis of the game. It shouldn't take too long though, as I've already done a longer dedicated video to both of these sides, which will be linked on the end screen of this video. Starting with Arsenal, at the end of the 2017-18 season, Arsene Wenger left the Gunners, having guided them to either Champions League qualification or success in a major domestic trophy throughout the entirety of his 22-year spell in North London. He'd then be replaced by Unai Emery, whose tenure at the club was slightly woeful. However, he would bring talents like Martinelli and Saka into the first team, as well as using players like Xhaka and Nketiah, who were the only 4 players at the club during Emery's time in charge that started against Newcastle. By December 2019, Emery would be sacked after 18 months in the capital, being replaced later that month by a certain Mikel Arteta. After a few years in the building, Arteta looked games away from being fired by the Gunners, before in September 2021, something finally clicked, as they went on a great run, nearly reaching the Champions League for the first time since 2016. In the end, they just missed out, but spent well in the summer window, regaining their incredible form, and finishing the year top of the league by 7 points before coming up against Newcastle in their first game back. Talking of Newcastle, their downfall is pretty much completely due to one man as well, however was down to him joining rather than leaving. In 2007, Mike Ashley bought the Toon, and in his 14 years as owner, he was able to pretty much remove any hope their fans had of ever reaching the Champions League again. Of course, that was until 2020, when rumours of a big money Saudi takeover started circulating. It took a while, but after overcoming issues with the Premier League, the deal finally went through in late 2021, where soon after, Eddie Howe would come in, dragging the team up from bottom of the league to as high as 9th in the table in just over half a season. They spent well and bought smartly in 2022, with the Toon soaring high, up in 3rd before their fixture on Tuesday. Now, onto the analysis I guess. First thing I need to mention is that this game wasn't particularly revolutionary. We didn't see something huge that hadn't been done in the past by either side. However, it did highlight a couple of strengths each side have, with a couple of small tweaks in order to give an advantage against the opposition they were coming up against. I'll open by focusing on the home side, given they were the more attacking side, and also mainly because I just want to. It's my video, I do what I want. Also, before I forget, this is how Newcastle lined up, and this is how Arsenal did. Although, as I'll mention later, it actually looked a lot different to this for the majority of the game, with or without the ball. Going into the match, we could be fairly confident that Arsenal, who were 10 unbeaten in the league, having won 9 of them, would be controlling possession, and so we'd see lots of the interesting positional play system they've played this year. Out of possession on Tuesday, Arsenal seemed to be playing a mix of a 4-2-3-1 and a 4-1-4-1, despite having often been in a 4-3-3 recently. This was mainly due to Odegaard blocking any passing lanes to Bruno Guimaraes, whose range of passing is what could have caused Arsenal problems on the counter-attack, something I'll get back onto in a minute, just after what I cover what the Gunners look like in attacking phases of play. When playing out from the back, their defensive 4 actually shifts into a 3, with Ben White coming in and Zinchenko, or whoever's playing at left back, shifting into midfield alongside Thomas Partey, as the likes of Odegaard and Xhaka push further up the pitch, with the Gunners transforming into a unique 3-2-5 shape. It's Odegaard and Xhaka taking up space in these channels, which allow Arsenal to occupy and thus isolate opponent centre-backs from their full-backs. Just cutting in here, I forgot to say that they do this by staying between the lines of the defenders and the midfielders, which often means that if a midfielder doesn't track back, a defender then needs to step up out of defence, allowing the wingers Martinelli and Saka to cause damage in one-on-one situations, and is an example of how Arsenal indirectly do certain actions in order to make the most of their most dangerous players. This is something we've seen various times over the years in Pep Guardiola's sides, someone who's obviously influenced Mikel Arteta since working with him, with the most obvious example of this being Barcelona so often overloading the midfield on the left-hand side, before quickly switching the ball over to Lionel Messi on the right flank or right inside channel. Now before I go any further, this is the first time I'm doing a tactical analysis like this, and so I'm sure in a couple months time I'll disagree with a lot of the things I've said, and so sorry if it's not perfect. In terms of in the defensive side of things, Arsenal knew that Newcastle would be much more reserved than normal, and that it would be either an individual individual error of sorts, or turnover in possession, that'd be the team's only real chance of scoring from open play. And there's two ways Eddie Howe likes this Newcastle team to do that. Number one, through their intense counter press, in which they'll often play the ball out wide to their wingers, who may even deliberately give the ball away so that they can win it back further up the field, rather than trying to play through the midfield, which at the moment doesn't really have much creativity, other than the brilliant Bruno Guimaraes, whose passing often allows them to spray the ball out wide and counter-attack after winning the ball back deep. There was a few little tweaks which Arsenal did to help prevent these possibilities, most obviously with Odegaard's role in the counter-press to cover the Brazilian, which not only did its role of suffocating Newcastle's defenders when they had the ball, but also prevented any problems occurring behind him. As well as this, we saw the likes of Gabriel and Ben White be much more aggressive in entering the opposition half. Ben White particularly overlapped a lot more frequently than we've seen recently, although this may just be due to the fact that Newcastle's compact mid-block made it a lot harder to progress play through Thomas Partey than normal. I also felt Gabriel was fascinating, as he's always been further up the pitch than Saliba, but I felt he was even more aggressive than usual today, often coming out and pushing Newcastle further into their own half, which for large periods of the game nullified the possibility of a successful sequence of pressing for Newcastle, because they were too deep for a counter press, meaning their players weren't able to get up the pitch fast enough to shut down all passing options for Arsenal. It certainly wasn't the first time Gabriel's done it this season, and he probably did it just as much against Brighton a few days earlier, but it's still definitely something to note down. Also, I don't want to go too in depth about literally every tactical aspect of this Arsenal side, as it was very similar to how they normally play, as you'd expect from a team at the top of the league, because you generally don't alter a winning side too much. One thing I will do is summarise the first half, in which for the majority Newcastle looked shaky and likely to concede. Again and again, Odegaard caused problems for Newcastle indirectly, as when Newcastle had the ball, they were forced into playing the ball into less dangerous areas for the Gunners, as well as through him occupying Sven Botman while they attack, as Nketiah's physicality and movement alongside Granit Xhaka occupied Fabian Schär and one of their midfielders, and even Trippier at times. Another issue for Newcastle was that Willock wasn't tracking back deep enough at times early in the game, which just further exaggerated this issue, meaning the Toon were lucky to get away with the score being level after the first 30. As the half went on though, Fabian Schär started coming up into midfield, which helped combat the problem of Bruno not seeing the ball as much as usual, as the Swiss defender was the man who started progressing the ball forwards. See, one thing to note is that Newcastle like playing balls in behind fullbacks, with the aim of either getting one of their forwards in behind for a chance on goal, or more commonly to trigger the counter press as I mentioned earlier, as when the attacker loses the ball, their positional play means they often have numbers in the right areas to cause their opponents issues. This didn't work so well on Tuesday for a few reasons, mainly because Arsenal had them pinned back so far, but also because Arsenal's 3-2-5 formation actually perfectly allows them to quickly bring a number of bodies into the wide and inside channels, through fullbacks covering for the midfielders before they get back and cover the centre, etc, etc. Like I said, I'm new to this, not quite a genius yet. In the second half, a lot changed in midfield for both sides. Firstly, Newcastle's 4-3-3 switched to more of a 4-5-1, solidifying their mid-block and compacting the midfield and half spaces, which had caused them so much trouble early in the game. And for Arsenal, this change from Newcastle meant that their two-man midfield of sorts found itself far more dynamic, as they probably could have done with a more technically capable player in Xhaka's role further up the pitch, in order to work in the smaller spaces and bypass Newcastle's block. By compacting the midfield and playing a 4-5-1, Newcastle made a system which was actually reminiscent of their one under Steve Bruce, although it was a lot harder to play against, as Arsenal were unable to play balls from deep, breaking the lines, which was something we saw a lot before Howe came in, and it's likely what would have cost them the game under the former manager. We also saw Willock overlapping a lot more, as despite having just as little of the ball, when they had it, they generally looked a lot more composed, although I might just be chatting shit, as it could have been my mind playing tricks on me, due to the defensive system looking better, meaning they looked more like an overall footballing unit. Another way Newcastle looked to attack was when Arsenal had the ball deeper with their centre halves, where Bruno often came out of midfield slightly, acting as a second striker in a system which resembled a 4-2-2, preventing the game from going static, and not allowing the Arsenal defenders the time on the ball to pick out a line-breaking pass. As the game went on, it became clearer and clearer that Newcastle's best chance of scoring would be for a set piece, with a goal from open play looking very unlikely, as Arsenal dominated the ball and defended strongly. Overall, I do think Arsenal were clearly the better side, despite Newcastle coming just as close to scoring, with Joelinton missing the target on the stroke of half-time from a corner. And after a scrappy 0-0 draw, in which the main talking point was how you viewed Newcastle's performance, I want to answer one question. How exactly did Newcastle become the first team to stop Arsenal from scoring this season? To put it simply, they rode their luck a bit in the first half, as well as an extremely fortunate penalty decision going in their favour. But from the 30th minute onwards, it was their compact block, willingness to press at the right times, and just general feel-good vibe around the club at the minute, which most likely made the difference, with the mental battle being key to their relative success, and something I think Mikel Arteta lost in the closing minutes, as he went ballistic a couple times on a touchline. Further exaggerated by the fact it was obvious fairly early, the chances of Newcastle winning this game were minuscule. One final thing I want to say is that, like I spoke about before, This is my first time really doing a tactical analysis video, and so there's probably various points throughout this video where I misspoke, was generally confusing, and didn't portray my thoughts very well. And so, for those moments I do apologise. Please do leave a comment if you need me to clarify anything, and I'll be sure to reply. And for the future, I'll only be improving at all aspects in these videos from here on out, particularly if you want me to keep doing them once a week. In fact, if you do want to see another one of these next week, comment something like, "Eric, please do this again. You're so intelligent and just the best in the world at everything." And then I'll know that you guys have a real interest in it. But for now, thanks for watching. Like, comment and subscribe if you're new. Check out my socials, link in description. And most importantly, of course, enjoy your day.